Ever feel like you're running on autopilot? Like you brush your teeth, make coffee, even drive to work without really thinking about it.
Yeah.
Turns out there's a hidden superpower at play here.
Hmm.
Habits. Today, we're diving into the fascinating world of habits with excerpts from the first chapter of The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg.
And, this isn't just about mindlessly scrolling through your phone.
Right.
Habits are powerful forces that shape our lives in profound ways,
Yeah.
often without us even realizing it.
Okay, so we're all creatures of habit,
Yeah.
but how deeply ingrained are these things really? Duhigg kicks off his book with a story that blew my mind.
Oh, wow.
A man named Eugene Pauly, or EP for short.
Okay.
Imagine this. Viral encephalitis ravages your brain, wiping out most of your memory.
Oh, my
You
God.
can't remember what you ate for breakfast,
Hmm.
your children's names, even your age.
Wow.
That was Eugene's reality.
It's tragic, of course, but also scientifically fascinating.
Yeah.
The virus essentially destroyed his medial temporal lobe, a key area of the brain responsible for forming new memories.
Right.
Similar to what happened to another famous patient, HM, who became a textbook case of amnesia.
So no new memories. That's devastating.
Exactly.
But what makes Eugene's story different?
Well, unlike HM, who was profoundly debilitated,
Okay.
Eugene could still hold conversations live at home with his wife,
Wow.
and even do things that seemed to require memory, like making breakfast or taking walks around the neighborhood.
Wait, how is that possible if he couldn't form new memories? That's what's so mind-boggling. It's like his brain found a workaround.
Exactly, and this is where the concept of the habit loop comes in.
Okay.
Scientists at MIT were studying rats running mazes around the same time Eugene got sick, and they stumbled upon this incredible three-part process that explains how habits work at a neurological level.
Okay, let's unpack this habit loop thing.
Sure.
It sounds like the key to understanding Eugene's abilities.
Absolutely.
Okay,
So first there's the cue.
right.
Think of it as a trigger that sets the habit in motion.
Okay.
It could be anything. A time of day, a location, an emotion, even a specific thought. For example, you walk into the kitchen and see a bowl of fruit on the counter.
Okay, that's my cue to grab a banana.
Exactly.
What's next?
Then comes the routine, the actual behavior itself. So you reach for the banana, peel it, and take a bite.
And the reward. That sweet potassium-packed goodness, of course. But I'm guessing there's more to it than that.
You got it. The reward is what reinforces the habit, making you more likely to repeat it in the future.
Yeah.
And here's the thing.
Okay.
Your brain loves this loop because it's efficient.
Right.
It outsources these routines to a more primitive part of your brain called the basal ganglia.
Hold on. Basil, what? Let's break that down.
Think of the basal ganglia as a tiny autopilot in your brain,
Oh.
taking over those routine actions you do without thinking.
Okay.
This frees up your conscious mind for other more complex tasks.
So it's like my brain is saying, hey, basal ganglia, you handled the banana situation. I've got bigger fish to fry.
Exactly. And this is what was happening with Eugene. Even though his conscious memory was severely impaired,
Okay.
his basal ganglia was still functioning, allowing him to learn and perform new habits.
This whole habit loop thing is blowing my mind. It's like we're uncovering a secret code to our own brains. But how did scientists figure out that this was what was going on with Eugene?
Well, they devised a clever experiment using stickers and everyday objects to see if he could learn a new pattern.
Oh, interesting.
Remember, Eugene couldn't consciously remember anything for more than a minute or so.
So how could he possibly learn anything new?
That's the amazing part. After weeks of repeating this sticker experiment, his performance steadily improved.
Wow.
He was choosing the correct object almost every time, even though he couldn't explain how he was doing it.
It's like his hand knew what to do before his mind could catch up.
Exactly. His basal ganglia was forming the habit even though his conscious memory wasn't involved.
Wow. This is incredible. But how does this explain how he found his way home from walks if he couldn't even draw a map of his neighborhood? Surely there's more to it than just the habit loop, right?
Well, think about it. His daily walks followed a consistent route, with the same environmental cues triggering his habit to turn left here, cross the street there, and so on.
So even though Eugene couldn't remember the details of his house or neighborhood, the habit of walking that route was so ingrained in his brain thanks to his basal ganglia that it guided him back home. Amazing.
Right. And this isn't just true for Eugene.
Yeah.
Think about a time when you drove home on autopilot.
Oh, yeah.
That's your habit loop in action.
Okay, so we're all basically talking habit loops, running on autopilot most of the time.
Pretty much.
But if habits are so deeply ingrained, can we ever change them? Or are we just slaves to these ingrained
And that's the
patterns?
question we'll explore next time.
Ooh, a cliffhanger.
The good news is that habits, while powerful, are also surprisingly delicate.
Okay.
And that's where things get really interesting.
Welcome back. We're picking up our deep dive into the power of habit. And last time we were talking about Eugene Pauly, the man who could form new habits, even though a virus basically wiped out his memory.
Yeah, it's a remarkable story.
It is.
And it really highlights how these automatic processes, these habits we form, are wired into our brains.
Right. And we left off with this cliffhanger.
Hmm?
Can we change our habits, or are we stuck with them forever?
Yeah.
Because you mentioned that habits are surprisingly delicate.
Yeah.
And now I'm really curious what that means.
Well, remember those MIT experiments with rats running mazes? Researchers found that even deeply ingrained habits could be disrupted by changing the cue or the reward.
Oh, so like changing the reward.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say my habit is reaching for a cookie every afternoon when I hit that 3 p.m. slump.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of cue change are we talking about here?
Let's say your cue is that feeling of tiredness that hits you mid-afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of automatically heading for the cookie jar, you could try disrupting that cue by getting up and taking a quick walk, listening to an energizing song, or even just switching to a different task for a few minutes.
So change up the routine, but wouldn't I still be craving that cookie?
You might. But here's where the reward comes in. If you replace cookie eating with a new routine that provides a similar reward, like a burst of energy or a feeling of accomplishment, the old habit starts to weaken.
Hmm, interesting. So you're saying I can basically trick my brain.
Kind of.
Okay, but hold on. If habits are so easily disrupted, wouldn't that make it harder to build good ones too? Like, what if I'm trying to make exercise a regular habit? Every little change could throw me off track, right?
That's a great point. Building new habits does require consistency, but understanding how delicate they are can actually work to our advantage.
Oh, how so?
Think of it like this.
Okay.
Habits are like paths in the woods.
Okay.
The more you walk a particular path, the more defined it becomes.
Hmm.
But if you start taking a different route, even slightly, the old path starts to fade.
I like that analogy. So when we're trying to break a bad habit, we're essentially creating a new path for our brains to follow.
Exactly. And the same goes for building good habits. We need to consciously create those new pathways, make them clear and rewarding, so our brains are more likely to choose them over the old, less desirable ones.
Okay, I'm starting to see how powerful this knowledge can be.
Yeah.
Duhigg mentions a woman named Lisa Allen who was struggling with smoking, overeating, and debt.
Oh, wow.
It sounds like she had some serious habits she needed to break. Did she use the habit loop to turn things around?
She did. And it all started with a trip to Egypt. Being in a new environment with different cues and routines disrupted her usual habit loops.
So a change of scenery can help shake things up.
Yeah, sometime.
I guess that makes sense. But what about when she got back home?
Huh?
I'm guessing those old habits were waiting for her.
They were, but Lisa was armed with a new understanding of the habit loop.
Okay.
She started by tackling her overeating instead of mindlessly snacking when she was bored or stressed.
Yeah.
She replaced those routines with healthier alternatives, like going for a walk or calling a friend.
So she swapped out the old routines for new ones that provided similar rewards.
Right.
Pretty clever. But what about the debt?
Mm-hmm.
That's a tough one to break.
It is. But Lisa approached it the same way. She identified her triggers for overspending.
Like what?
Things like seeing items on sale.
Mm-hmm.
Then instead of impulsively buying things, she started asking herself if she really needed them.
It's like she was retraining her brain to pause before making a purchase.
Exactly. She was disrupting the old habit loop and replacing it with a new one.
I love that. But are all habits this easy to change?
Well,
I have some pretty stubborn ones that I've been battling for years.
it's true. Not all habits are created equal. Some, like those tied to addiction, can be incredibly difficult to break.
Yeah, I bet.
Duhigg explores those challenges later in the book.
I'm sure he does. But for now, the takeaway is that we have more control over our habits than we might think.
Right. And even if we can't completely eliminate a bad habit,
Right.
understanding the habit loop gives us the tools to manage it more effectively.
This is so empowering. It's like we've been given the keys to the control panel of our own brains.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
But we've been focusing a lot on bad habits. What about good ones? Are they formed the same way?
They are. The same principles apply.
Okay.
We need a clear cue, a specific routine, and a rewarding outcome.
So if I want to make exercise a regular part of my life, what kind of reward should I be focusing on? Because honestly, I'm not one of those people who gets a runner's high.
That's okay. The reward doesn't have to be some huge euphoric feeling.
Right.
It could be as simple as the sense of accomplishment you get from completing your workout,
Hmm.
the feeling of increased energy afterward, or even just checking it off your to-do list.
So it's about finding those little wins that keep us motivated.
Mm.
I can definitely relate to that. But in all your research and reading on this topic, is there one habit-related tip that's really stuck with you?
You know, it's actually a very simple one.
What's that?
Start small. Don't try to change everything at once. Pick one habit you want to work on and make tiny changes, almost ridiculously easy ones.
So instead of trying to run a marathon, I should just focus on putting on my running shoes and walking around the block.
Exactly. Those small wins build momentum and confidence, making it more likely that you'll stick with the new habit.
This is so encouraging. It's like we've been given this secret decoder ring to understand the hidden forces shaping our lives.
It is fascinating stuff.
But we're not just talking about personal growth here.
Huh?
You mentioned earlier that Duhigg applies the habit loop to organizations and even
He
societies.
does. And that's what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive.
Wow, I can't wait to hear about that. So stay tuned, folks, because we're about to go from personal habits to habits on a much grander scale.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the power of habit. So far, we've been exploring how habits work in our own lives, from those mindless cookie cravings to Eugene Pauli's remarkable ability to form new habits, even with severe memory loss.
It really is amazing how our brains can adapt. Right. But now I'm really curious about this idea that Duhigg brings up, that the habit loop applies not just to individuals,
Yeah.
but also to organizations and even entire societies. That's a pretty big leap, isn't it?
It is, but think about it.
Yep.
Organizations and societies are made up of individuals, each with their own habits.
Right.
And when those individual habits start to align and reinforce each other, they can create patterns of behavior on a much larger scale.
Okay, I can see how that might work. But can you give me a concrete example? What does a societal habit even look like?
Well, Duhigg talks about the civil rights movement and how Rosa Parks' refusal to give up her seat on the bus sparked a chain reaction
Hmm.
that ultimately led to widespread social change.
That's a powerful example. But how does the habit loop fit into that? It wasn't like Rosa Parks woke up that morning and decided to trigger a social movement, right?
Right. But her act of defiance disrupted a deeply ingrained social habit,
Okay.
a pattern of behavior that had been accepted as the norm for generations.
Sure.
It created a new cue, a new possibility that spread like wildfire.
So it's like her action broke the old habit loop of segregation and sparked a new one of resistance and activism. That's incredible.
Exactly. And Duhigg argues that this same principle can apply to all sorts of social change, from political movements to environmental initiatives.
So if we want to create positive change in the world, we need to understand how to disrupt those old harmful habits
Yeah.
and create new beneficial ones on a collective level.
That's the ideal.
That's a pretty empowering idea, but also kind of daunting, right?
It can be, but it's also incredibly hopeful. Duhigg points out that even small changes in individual behavior can ripple outward and have a significant impact on the larger system.
So it's like the butterfly effect, but with habits. I love that. But let's bring it back to something a little more manageable. What about those of us who are just trying to get our own lives in order? What are some practical tips from Duhigg on how to break those bad habits and build good ones?
Well, we talked about the importance of starting small and focusing on one habit at a time, but Duhigg also emphasizes the importance of belief. You have to believe that you can change.
So it's not just about the mechanics of the habit loop, but also about having the right mindset.
Exactly. And it's important to be patient with yourself.
Yeah.
Change takes time. There will be setbacks.
Yeah.
You'll probably slip up and fall back into old patterns.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
But the key is to keep going. Keep experimenting. Keep learning what works for you.
So it's like we're all scientists in our own habit labs.
I like that. And remember, you don't have to do it alone. There are so many resources available to help you on your habit-changing journey. Books, podcasts, apps, support groups. Find what works for you and don't be afraid to ask for help.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
I agree.
It's amazing to think that something as simple as understanding the habit loop can have such a profound impact on our lives, from the personal to the societal.
It really is. And I encourage you to continue exploring this topic. There's so much more to learn.
Well, on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the power of habit. We've learned about the science behind habits, the surprising ways they shape our lives, and most importantly, how we can harness the power of the habit loop to create positive change both individually and collectively.
Got it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep exploring the fascinating world of habits.